And right now we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostick alongside Sonali Basak here to take you through that closing bell with the global simulcast. It has already started. There's Tim Stenovec in the radio booth, Emily Graffeo in today for Carol Masser. Welcome to our audiences across all of our Bloomberg platforms. An unchanged day on the S&P 500, Tim Stenovec, but a little bit more activity in the small and mid-cap space.
Yeah, Emily's been talking about the Russell 2000 all day today. We are seeing some activity there. I think investors still have a lot of questions about tariff policy. I've been asking our guests throughout the day today, are these letters providing more clarity? And one after one, people are saying not necessarily.
You know, it's funny. I wanted to look at the Russell year to date, and the little bit of a bid you're getting today brings you to almost flat. Now, isn't that a fascinating stat?
Also in the commodity space, there has been some movement. Look at copper prices up over 9% right now. Of course, coming after that tariff news from Trump, potentially a 50% tariff on copper.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, the tariff news, I mean, we did see a big downdraft in stocks when we started to get some of those headlines. Some of that coming, of course, first from his social media site and then later at that cabinet meeting. And it really is just a reminder, Tim, of this idea that the tariff issue is far from resolved and still potentially poses a risk to the markets.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what, you know, the big question people have is what does the August 1st deadline think? I mean, we speak to folks every day who basically say, well, he hasn't necessarily followed through on these tariff promises. And we just spoke to Chris Brigatti over at SWBC, and he was like, this is one he's not going to extend. August 1st, that is actually going to mean something.
And if you listen to his comments at that cabinet meeting, and I actually really encourage people to go back and listen to it. A lot of rambling, but in between that, he did make some very salient points about his philosophy on tariffs and trades, of course, hearkening back to President McKinley, and in his view, how that tariff situation, in his view, worked out. Let's take a look at the numbers across the board. Not a whole lot of action there with the S&P and NASDAQ. We're just going to call it unchanged. The S&P does have a red arrow, but only down about 4 points. The NASDAQ does have a green arrow, but only up about 6 points. The Dow Jones Industrial Average decidedly in the red, down more than 160 points or 0.4%. And the Russell 2000 decidedly in the green, up 14 points or 0.7%.
Still did have 269 stocks in the S&P 500 move higher today, whereas 231 moved lower.
Let's look at the sectors as well, because even though the sectors here show you a little bit of red on the screen, obviously it was enough to drag down the broader index here. You did have consumer staples, which was yesterday's gainer, and the relative safety trade in the market down more than 1% on the day. Utilities and financials also lower by almost 1% or more. Energy was your gainer. You had it up about 2.7% on the day. So very, very mixed trade, even though you had an index that showed roughly flat.
All right, let's get to some of the gainers today. I want to start with semiconductor stocks. I just went and chose the entire SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index. We saw shares of semis rise today. The group outperformed as analysts expressed optimism about the group's prospects. Mizuho Securities raised its price targets on a number of chip makers. KeyBank Capital Markets also raised targets on a number of chip makers. If you look at the SOX right now, of the 30 stocks in there, 27 of them were higher, 3 of them were lower. Intel up 7.2%, Global Foundries up 7%. On the downside, Broadcom did fall 0.9%. Also, Emily mentioned copper stocks. I want to go with Freeport-McMoRan. The shares jumped as much as 8.8% earlier in the session. They moved lower after that Trump announcement at the cabinet meeting to finish the day higher rather by over 2%. This after President Trump said he would impose 50% tariffs on copper.
Did you know there are people who collect like old pennies, you know, the ones that actually still had copper in them because they were anticipating a big jump in copper prices?
You know, it's funny you say that. I did not know that.
Okay.
But I did learn something about coins today, and I'm glad you brought this up.
What's that?
Charlie Pellet told me that in the U.S., we do not have the actual number of cents that a coin is worth on that coin. Like a dime doesn't say 10.
That blows my mind.
A quarter doesn't say 25.
And I don't know why, but it blows my mind.
Hey, you know what? We're a little different.
Yeah,
we're a little different.
We are America.
We are. Hey, I want to end with a stock that really had some serious outperformance today. ProKidney shares soared the most ever. Look at this, up more than 500%. Isn't this wild?
I've never heard of this.
It's a drug developer. It gave top-line results from a mid-stage trial of its experimental therapy to treat kidney disease. The company reported statistically significant and clinically meaningful positive top-line results from a full Group 1 modified intent-to-treat population of a phase 2 trial. And it was good news, and investors loved it. Look at this, up more than 500%, ticker PROK.
That is incredible, Tim. Let's go to the decliners, though. FICO, Fair Isaac, but known colloquially as FICO, fell 9% today after federal regulators said government-sponsored mortgage entities Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac will be able to use an additional firm when determining borrowers' creditworthiness. So they were using FICO. Now Fannie and Freddie will allow lenders to use Vantage 4.0, their credit score, to increase competition in the credit score ecosystem, at least according to what the regulators had to say. Vantage is a private company, so we couldn't see how the shares performed, but we did know that this was weighing heavily on FICO. I'm also watching shares of Hershey, down 3%, closing the day. Yeah, down about 3.2% after some management changes. The snack food company named Wendy's CEO Kirk Tanner as its CEO, replacing Michelle Buck. This is going to be effective August 18th. The reason why the street was so negative on this is that Hershey announced back in January that Buck would be retiring in June of 2026. And so the timing of the appointment is somewhat surprising, and the transition was almost a year early. So shareholders didn't like that. So we saw that stock falling. And then finally, First Solar. It's been a wild ride here for the solar stocks. Today we saw First Solar down, closing the day about 6.5% lower after President Donald Trump called for new rules that would restrict access to tax incentives for solar and wind projects that were already pared back in that big, beautiful bill.
Some of the big individual movers there when we talk about the aggregate market and the lack of movement that we saw in the S&P 500. I'll one-up you and take a look at the bond market. Treasuries basically doing nothing today. Yields are higher across the board, but only by about 1 to 2 basis points as you pick your point on the curve here. So a little bit of stasis, and we should point out most of the activity in the Treasury market actually came during the European hours here. So it's basically been stasis for the last couple of hours here on the U.S. side. Tim.
I got a little bit of a New York-centric story here, but there's a little technology in it as well.
Does it involve rats?
It doesn't.
No.
No, New York City is one of the biggest ride-hailing markets in the United States. And now, if you're in New York, you might start seeing Google's Waymo vehicles driving around because they're starting to test them here.
Oh, yeah?
But they have people behind the wheel. They're just gathering data.
Yeah.
The company sent out a social media post. They said, be sure to give us a wave and snap a pic if you see us in the
That's
city.
what they said? Okay.
And you're not just giving the Waymo a wave. You're giving the person sitting in the driver's seat a wave as well.
Do they know we don't give waves here?
Yeah, I was about
in
to
New
say,
York
I
at
mean,
cars?
they're going to get a wave, but I don't think it's the wave that they're looking for.
Exactly.
So as somebody that drives daily in New York City, the problem is actually not the cars, right? Like there's so many people.
It's the drivers?
And the people, right?
Okay.
I mean, jaywalking is a real thing in New York City. So it's a really interesting city to be trying this in. There are a lot of bikers, as you say, too. So again,
Tim.
I drive every morning in the city.
Can't trust those guys.
It's a lot to handle for a driverless car out there.
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to this. I think anything possibly to improve traffic in this city, I'm definitely all for. I'm also keeping an eye on gold, Timothy. We were just talking about copper. But did you know that Tether, this is the big stablecoin issuer, basically one of the two big publicly traded ones out there, apparently they've been hoarding $8 billion worth of gold in a secret Swiss vault. And I'm glad it's secret, because if it was public, that would be trouble. But it really gets to this idea. This story really captured my attention because there's been all this talk about stable coins, of course, with Circle recently going public. And the idea that you can't have a stable coin unless it's, actually backed by real assets, presumably dollars, or maybe in this case, something that can be converted into dollars like gold.
But doesn't this answer a lot of questions about what was backing Tether or what is backing Tether?
Yes.
Hasn't that been a big concern?
It's been a huge concern for a while. And I think it's also when you look up the run-up that we've seen in gold prices, remember there was a big period where it just didn't make sense, economic sense, as to why you were seeing such a surge. And maybe this helps to start explain it. And it might not just be Tether. There might be a lot of other folks out there that have been doing the same thing.
What happens then to the price or how much that stablecoin is worth if the price of whatever asset you have underlying it declines?
That's a good question. I don't know. Don't you host a crypto show?
I do. I was asking Sonali because she hosted with me.
Right, we've seen depegging, but just another fun fact to leave in your minds, guys. Tether itself was the 7th largest buyer of U.S. Treasuries last year, even ahead of most major countries. And so safety, perhaps in gold as well as Treasuries.
I have a question though. If I buy a stable coin, does it say on the coin how much it's worth?
There's no stable coin. Oh gosh.
There it is.
That's a joke.
Call
Romaine always brings it back.
That was good.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. That is going to do it for our cross-platform coverage of the market close on Bloomberg TV, Radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. We'll all be back tomorrow, same time, same place.